Hello, and welcome to the meeting of the Rotary E-Club of District 7710 for Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019. I'm Kathy Roadcup, E-Club of District 7710 President. Thanks for joining us. Our guest speaker this evening is Rickie White, who will be discussing the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association. Program Chair Kevin Primus will be introducing Rickie this evening. Kevin?
Rickie, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Everyone, Rickie is the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association's Executive Director and resident, quote, plant nerd. He actually embraces the title. For the past 20 years, Rickie has worked to collaborate with citizens, nonprofits, and governmental agencies to implement and manage ecological research and restoration projects in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and the Southeast United States. Most recently, Rickie led NatureServe's Southeast Conservation Science and Ecology team in using research to better understand and protect rare ecosystems across the region. When not waxing poetic to innocent bystanders about the wonders of plants, Rickie enjoys gardening, walking his dog Juno through the 17-acre wood in Durham, and imagining what it would be like to be Beaver Queen for a day. So, Rickie, that's your official bio. I did not make that up. That's the official bio on the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association website. I'm sure you will let us know about the Beaver Queen pageant, among other things. So, Rickie, thanks for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I don't have anything terribly formal, so feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. I'm sad that some people turned off their videos because I was going to ask people to raise their hands on some things real quick. But the folks who are on video, I'm going to put you on the spot. Oh, great. So does anyone besides Kevin know what a land trust is? Okay, this is helpful to me. So I will explain that very quickly. And does anyone know what watershed they live in? All right, good. That's typical. That's good. So what Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association is we're an environmental organization that's also a land trust. And what that means is the land trust movement is a movement that started probably 60 or 70 years ago in the US. And it was a way to conserve natural areas and other important areas in the US by purchasing those areas or purchasing what's called a conservation easement on land so that it couldn't be developed in the future. So the idea is that it's a very kind of moderate, non-controversial way to get conservation done in the US. And it's been really successful. There are probably 20 land trusts in North Carolina. There's thousands across the US. They're all nonprofits and they all work to buy land and conservation easements for different purposes, mostly for conservation. And we're a part of that movement. But in addition to being a land trust, we're a watershed association, which means that we're particularly interested in the creek and the water quality in that creek. And so I'll explain a little bit about that in my presentation. And we're, as part of that watershed association, really interested in education. And part of making people aware of the creek is to understand where they live in that geography so that you know where the water that you're putting into your storm sewer is going or onto the fertilizer in your yard, how that's affecting water downstream. So these are all things that we work on, and I'll just take you through just a handful of slides to give you a better sense for what we do. We just have developed a new website which went online I think about 5 months ago. I started with the organization about 3 months ago. So I'm talking to you about a lot of things that I wasn't personally responsible for the successes of, but I'm hoping to help make even more successful in the future as we move forward. This website is one of those things that's super cool and interesting. If you get a chance to go to ellerbecreek.org, you'll see a lot of information about what we do. Our kind of default slogan is we're all in this creek together. And it's the idea that we all have a role to play in making sure that we enjoy, benefit from, and clean up the water and the land that we live near. So the three big buckets of things that we work on are we protect land in the Ellerbe Creek watershed, and with a focus on protecting land that we think has wildlife value or water quality value or natural value of some sort. But we also work with a lot of partners and a lot of volunteers to restore land. So these are areas that maybe are really beat up or degraded, or streams. We've all probably been hiking or walking around the city and seen these streams that don't look so good. And we work to restore the banks, stabilize the banks of those streams, take out invasive exotic plants, take out trash, so that those streams function better, and eventually those streams are healthier for both wildlife and for downstream water quality. And finally, we do a lot of work on engagement. And that can mean a really lot of different things. It's not just education. It's not just working with school kids. It's really about trying to engage every citizen in the watershed and in the community to try to help help them understand the benefits of the creek, the value of the creek and the land, but also to learn from some of the communities and help understand what the needs of those communities are and how they overlap with our mission and how we can kind of work together to make Durham better. This is for, I don't know if anyone's a map person. I'm a map person. I really like maps. And this is a good overview of our watershed. And I think the important things to look at here are the really dark green areas. So backing up a little bit. This area right here, can you guys see my cursor when I move it? Okay, good. So the downtown area of Durham is right here. And in terms of the geography of Durham, downtown and those railroad tracks that run through downtown essentially run along a ridge line. And so everything to the north of that ridge line is the Ellerbe Creek watershed. Everything to the, and that all runs into Falls Lake, which eventually runs into the Atlantic Ocean. Everything to the south of that ridgeline is the New Hope and Third Fork Creek watershed, which kind of takes a different route to the ocean. And so we're really focused on this Ellerbe Creek watershed portion. These dark green areas are areas that we have acquired and are our nature preserves. So everything from downtown and our Pearl Mill Preserve over to, if folks know, north of 85 off of Roxborough Road, there's a Campari Foods. And back behind that shopping center, there's a giant beaver marsh, and we have a preserve there. Over in Watts-Hillendale, we have a really large, well, a relatively large preserve that protects a lot of the banks of the stream called 17 Acre Wood. And then we're working a lot over towards Falls Lake up in this direction to try to preserve more land, because preserving land up closer to Falls Lake is going to give us more value in terms of protecting the water quality in Falls Lake. Any questions so far about where the geography or the work we do? I'll keep going, but feel free to jump in.
Can you, Rickie, can you show us with your cursor where 85 goes? I know it's
Sure.
easy if you already know, but.
Yes, so this reddish line is I-85 right through here. And this is US 70, whoops. This is US 70 going down. And so East End Connector is not on this map, but it is, I think, going around right through here. And that will be the road that eventually connects Durham Freeway with US 70 and 85. Yep, great. And then, so overall, we have protected 450 acres. We have 5 preserves open to the public. So anyone can go to 17 Acre Woods, the Rocks, Lively Nature Preserve, Pearl Mill Preserve, Beaver Marsh, or Glenstone. We have trails, public trails that you can hike on, enjoy the nature. And it's pretty cool to be able to do all that really close to the city. It's a little bit of a hidden gem at this point because a lot of people drive much further out to go to trails, but we do have some really cool natural areas right here in the city. In addition to the preserves, we do work outside of the preserves, specifically what we call stormwater projects. So those are about working with landowners in the city and the county to do what's called green infrastructure, which basically means retrofitting areas and building kind of different types of structures to help better manage stormwater, both flow and stormwater pollution issues. So it essentially allows us to clean up the creek by putting in some of these measures. And we have a lot of challenges. There's a big reason why we're working on this. This is a map of, again, the watershed in red outline. So you see, this is the watershed. When you look at this map, you can see that same outline in red over to the left. That's our watershed. And Falls Lake is the squiggly dragon-like polygon over to the right. And Falls Lake is the drinking water for Raleigh and a lot of the municipalities in Wake County. The upper stretches of Falls Lake, by EPA's definition, are very poor quality water. So that means it's pretty, it's not a good source for drinking water. Luckily, the intake for drinking water is further down in this area for Raleigh. So they're still, getting decent water, but any inputs that go into here eventually flow down. So we're really working on trying to clean up this watershed to clean up that larger part of Falls Lake that is in such poor water quality. But we have a ton of challenges to do that. So we're not in a city where all development stopped. So development and different land use practices has been what's caused this degradation. So this Ellerbe Creek watershed is the most urban watershed in the Falls Lake region. And as a consequence, there's not a lot of places for when the water hits pavement, it just rushes down, it carries all the pollutants with it, and it goes straight into our streams. So every time we develop something like this house that is essentially backfilled into a stream area, was the former floodplain of a creek near downtown, we're reducing the water quality downstream. So one of the ways that we can help with that is we can create green infrastructure like I talked about. And one of those is this bioretention pond that we do. So the problem here was that this part of Ellerbe Creek is extremely polluted and has a ton of pavement all around it. And the solution is to build these essentially ponds that take the water from that pavement and filter it slowly and then release it into the creek. So instead of having this rush of water that goes straight into the creek with all the pollutants, everything's filtered and then it slowly releases back into the creek. And all the pollutants stay in that bioretention area. And one or two bioretention projects doesn't necessarily make a huge difference, but there are opportunities throughout the watershed to do thousands of these types of projects over time. And so we're working with the city and others to do a much larger set of projects. So this is the downtown area, and the area that's the part of the creek that drains downtown runs north from here and goes under I-85. And there's a huge amount of pavement and houses in here, which means that there are a lot of challenges to the water quality. And one of the cool things is that the city is working to build, with our help, something called the South Ellerbe Wetlands, which will filter a ton of the water that comes from downtown before it goes to the creek. We're doing a lot of work in Pearl Mill Preserve to do this bioretention project. And we're working with individual homeowners to install rain gardens and cisterns, which help individual landowners do their own part to help and improve the water quality. And eventually what we hope to do is repeat this kind of project throughout the watershed. so that we have these kinds of bioretention and green infrastructure projects all across the watershed. This is a picture that I just took on Saturday. One of the things that surprises people is that in the city of Durham, we've got wildlife, really cool wildlife. I took this from the parking lot of the Compare Foods on South Roxborough Street, looking into the marsh that we manage and preserve. And that's a giant beaver. It's cleaning its tail. And it was super cool because they normally don't come out during the daytime. But that little preserve that we manage, we put what are called camera traps out on that preserve. And what they do is they're motion detecting cameras. And when something passes by that camera, it snaps a picture. And not only have we captured beavers in that marsh, obviously, but we have pictures of coyotes, deer, herons, and really extraordinary pictures of otters, which are, that's a pretty significant find for the city. And then this creature called a mink, you guys probably know this from mink coats. Well, that's actually a real animal that is pretty rare and that lives in the city. And so if we can kind of work together, we can actually manage a lot of these natural areas in a way that allows these wildlife to thrive and come back even close to us. And what that allows us to do is to have examples for our kids and our neighbors. When they go out to these preserves, they can go straight out of their house door and walk across the street and walk into a preserve and see this kind of thing, which is super encouraging. It allows them to have a connection to nature without having to go to a national park. And this is where it's really important, I think, to think about all of the underserved communities that we have in Durham, finding ways to make sure that the work that we do as a watershed association isn't just reaching what an environmental movement has traditionally reached, which is our wealthy and white communities. And we've been just as equally involved in that here in Durham, but expanding the work that we do to listen to what the needs of the communities are beyond just those traditional white wealthy neighborhoods that we worked in, and understand where the work that we do can overlap with the needs of some of these communities like East Durham and some parts of North Durham, where there's equally needs for people to experience nature and to go out into the woods and to use the creek, but it might just not be in exactly the same way that we're used to in Watts Hill and Dale or Duke Park. And so we're really working on that through a program called Parks with Purpose, where we're working with we've hired a few people from the East Durham community, and we're working closely with an advisory board in East Durham in what's called the Goose Creek watershed of Ellerbe Creek, to try to understand what the needs of that community are, to try to work with them to help address those needs while we're addressing some of our overall mission. And one of the big things that's come to play in talking in East Durham and Durham in general is flooding. Flooding is affecting a lot of us in Durham, both wealthy and poor neighborhoods, but the effects on the poor neighborhoods are exacerbated by the fact that people can't bounce back once their house floods or their basement floods as easily as they can in other neighborhoods. And so we're working really closely with the neighbors in that community to do a better job of mapping where the flooding's happening and lobbying the city of Durham and working with the city of Durham to help make them aware of the problem and issues and how we can use things like bioretention ponds and rain gardens and other green infrastructure to lessen the future impacts of flooding by allowing those big rainstorms to be filtered in those ponds rather than rushing straight down streams into people's basements. So that was my unrehearsed talk about Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association. I missed a ton of things, I'm sure, but this is just kind of a taste for the kinds of work that we do. It is Giving Tuesday, and although we don't have a program on Giving Tuesday, we did just kick off our end of year campaign. So if anybody's interested in getting involved as a volunteer, foremost, we're really interested in that. We have a lot of opportunities to go out into our preserves and help with work days or trash pickups. And so contact me or contact Kevin if you want to get involved with that, and we can put you in touch with the right staff person. But also, it's our end of year campaign. So if you want to go to our website and donate to us to help us with some of the work I just talked to you about, I won't say no. So I appreciate the time. I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts or ideas y'all have about how we can be more effective, especially since it sounds like a lot of you might not know what a land trust is, and maybe this is the first time you've heard about some of this kind of work in Durham.
Thanks, Rickie. That was a fantastic program, and we're so glad that you shared it with us. I encourage everybody to unmute and feel free to ask Rickie questions.
Rickie, this is Rich Jaworski. I have a quick question.
Hi, Rich.
Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I stepped away from the computer for a minute, so you may have already said this, but I don't think that North Carolina is heavy on heavy industry. And I've heard that you mentioned the location of water makes a difference if it can't flush down properly. The pollutant is going to remain behind. Mm-hmm. And I think that North Carolina is pretty well known for having coal ash muck up our water system. But aside from what I just said, what are you fighting most? What do you have to worry about most in terms of stopping the pollution before you have to clean it up later?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. A couple of things to point out. One is that Durham is not real heavy on the polluting industries right now, but it historically really was. So a lot of those, if you're familiar with the Pearl Mill, which is now a condo complex just north of downtown, or some of those other mills, they weren't all tobacco factories. Some of them were textile mills. Yeah. And when you look at the histories that residents have written from like the late 1800s, early 1920s, Ellerbe Creek ran different shades of red and yellow and purple and blue, depending on what textiles were being dyed at the factory, because they didn't have a sanitary, industrial sanitary sewer system at that time. So we're still recovering from the historic pollution that occurred as a consequence of some of those mills. And the best we can do there is to just try to kind of bide our time and restore things as we can. The bigger issue right now is actually with what we call impervious surface, which basically means areas where rain hits things and doesn't go into the soil, right? So it's pavement, it's roofs, it's other things. And if you can think about soil and ground and grass as being a natural sponge, and you think about pavement and roofs as being basically rain repellents, all that water's got to move somewhere. And so when it doesn't have grass or forest or trees to absorb it, it runs straight downhill. It goes across the pavement, which has oil residue and gas residue on it, and it goes straight into the gutters. What you might not realize is that the gutters go straight into the creek, right? So they're not going into a separate sewer system and getting filtered. They're going straight into the creek. So all of that pollution is going to the creek, and that's what's causing a lot of our problems right now. It's mostly just residual oil and gas and stuff, and it concentrates as you get these rainstorms. The other thing that happens with pavement is that it speeds everything up, right? So all that water gushes down, and the creeks end up getting really hammered because you have these floods that you wouldn't normally have that scour the banks and make the creeks banks really steep and deep. So if you've ever been to a creek in the Piedmont, they tend to be like 4 feet under the rest of the forest. And it's because the water's just from all that pavement is rushing down straight to the creek and carving it out. So those are the things that we're finding are the biggest issues, and the things that we're doing. We're installing green infrastructure to try to fix that. And then we're working with the city to try to change some of the development practices in the future to make it so that there's more of incentive for builders to create stormwater treatment on site rather than just letting the water run off.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps.
Yeah.
Rickie, this is Kevin. So what happens if the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association and anyone else that does this sort of work in Durham, what if we stop doing it and we just allow the water to go where the water is going to go? We saw where the red areas are on that map for Falls Lake. And I'm not asking for a specific time estimate, but what's going to happen if there is no mitigation, if there is no work to work on the creek?
Well, things keep getting worse. And so eventually, if we weren't working, and it's not just Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association, but the city of Raleigh has a fund we've set up to help buy land around Falls Lake to help with this. If we don't do this work and accelerate it, then the city of Raleigh is not going to have a clean drinking water source. So that's a pretty big deal in a big city like that. I'm sure there's some technology out there that would be able to handle the more polluted water, but really what you want is to keep your water clean so you don't have to worry about having to go that extra mile to do this over-the-top filtration. And so the worst case scenario is that Raleigh doesn't have a safe drinking water supply, and the city of Raleigh residents can't rely on their drinking water to be safe. And even though our watershed itself goes into Raleigh drinking water, it doesn't go into Durham's, we want to be good neighbors because we want the people upstream from us to be good neighbors as well, and to make sure that our water is clean. And we have the same issue. I mean, there's more development happening in North Durham and northern Orange County, and that affects the water that we get from Lake Mickey, which is where we primarily get our water from.
Very good. Anyone else have a question for Rickie?
Yeah, this is Gene Perry. I was just wondering, because every year we hear of the, I guess, the state and the municipality doing salting of roads during the winter time. I mean, that cannot be good.
It's complicated. I think we get that it's necessary. Salt does change the chemistry of the water. It does, depending on how the concentration of the salt, it can kill off a lot of fish and wildlife. I'd be interested. I lived in Chicago for a while, and that has, you can see the effects of that salt in places there where there are roadsides that just are kind of empty of any plants or anything because they're treating for like 5 months in the year. I don't necessarily see that so much here. It's a little bit more subtle, but yeah, ideally we'd be using more sand and less salt.
Yeah, I'm from New York City, and I know that well, it's New York City.
Yeah.
But in a smaller community like this with the watershed and the water resources we have, it must be devastating on an annual basis.
Well, I mean, I think we're lucky because we don't have to put salt out too much. So it's not on my list of top 5 issues. It's not on the top 5, but it's definitely something that I worry about and watch for because it does affect things. I mean, the I don't know if any of you guys watched local news, but maybe it was 2 weeks ago. There was this story about, I think it was on Guest Road or one of the roads north of Durham going out of town. And there was a truck carrying chlorine for pools. And it was concentrated chlorine. And it had an accident. And all of the chlorine spilled out of the truck. And the thing that concerned me was that rather than talking about, oh my gosh, this is a potentially devastating impact downstream, the only news note was, oh, it was good because they managed to push it all into the storm sewer and get it away from the road. And I'm like, but but that means it all went downstream. So sometimes we don't think about that because, again, and it's not to fault anyone, but because I think a lot of people just assume that once it goes in the storm sewer, something good happens to it. But we really all need to be thinking about what does go in that, how it affects our neighbors downstream and how it affects us.
Rickie,
On that note, I wanted to ask if there was any, has there been any environmental impact assessment of that spill on the watershed or?
So that wasn't Ellerbe Creek. That was that would have been Eno River. And I've been meaning to ask the Eno River Association, which is another land trust just north of us that you guys are probably aware of, what that impact assessment looked like, but I haven't had a chance to. But it's definitely something that if it were to occur in the Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association, if we had bandwidth, we would definitely be trying to follow up and figure out what happened. And if nothing else, try to educate the first responders to try to have them call up some of the other groups that might be able to help to head that off before it goes in the storm sewer.
so Rickie, we talked a little bit about this before, but one of our areas of focus with Rotary is clean water and sanitation. And, you know, we do some fundraising. There's lots of things that our region does, or our area, and especially, you know, the 44 clubs and Carrie takes a lead in some of our fundraising for clean water. But could you tell us about the Beaver Queen pageant?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And what that's about, because it's quite a phenomenon that I've just learned about. Maybe everyone else knows, but I'd love to hear you explain it.
Yeah, so we're a really unique organization in that we are in Durham, and Durham's a quirky place. And about 10 or 12 years ago, the Department of Transportation was working on an expansion of I-85 just right around the Duke Park neighborhood. And the residents got wind that the Department of Transportation was planning on dynamiting the beaver lodges that were along the creek to try to get rid of them before they did the expansion. And they were going to kill the beavers to do it. And the residents got really upset about that. And they managed to lobby and protest and get DOT to find an alternative to doing that. They were still able to expand the road without killing the beavers. To celebrate that, they had a party in the little park in Duke Park, and they were kind of a quirky bunch. So they decided they were going to have a unique party with music and food, and they were all going to dress up as beavers. And so they all kind of made their own beaver tails and put on beaver teeth and all this stuff and went out. And after that, they had such a good time, they decided they wanted to have a pageant every year, and people took on beaver personas every year, and there were usually 4 or 5 contestants. And they started having this Beaver Queen pageant. They realized that they could make money off of it by asking people to pay $5 to vote for their favorite Beaver Queen, and the one who bought the most votes won. And they decided that they would give that money to Ellerbe Creek Watershed Association. So that's how the Beaver Queen pageant became our biggest fundraiser. And now it's this giant, family-friendly, very quirky, weird festival that happens every May in Duke Park. And there's like thousands of people that filter into this park and watch this crazy pageant happen. Everybody comes up with a different persona. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you get a chance, Google it, Beaver Queen pageant. You'll see all kinds of fun pictures.
And it's a co-ed event, correct?
It's a co-ed event. So there are women dressed up as beavers, there are men dressed up as beavers, there are kids dressed up as different, and it's really tongue-in-cheek, and so everybody has their own persona. So there's different plays on words. There was a woman who dressed up as a penguin dressing up as a beaver. There's it's really fun and interesting.
And when does that happen?
In May.
in May. And if you wanted to apply to become a Beaver Queen contestant, you know, Gene has this look in his eye.
Yeah, I can tell.
You know,
I
when
think
do you
he's
need to
ready.
apply by? What's the
I think
process?
he's ready. I'll get you the information, Gene. It's called the Beaver Lodge. There's a loose group of people who run it, and they vet potential contestants. So when y'all are ready, when the Rotary Club is ready to have Miss or Mr. Rotary Beaver 2020, contact me and I'll get you in touch with them.
That sounds like a great challenge.
Yeah. But seriously, it's a lot of fun. If y'all get a chance Kevin can kind of get on your calendars when we have a date set. It's so much fun and so interesting and so weird. So if you like different, it's a good little event to come to.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Well, Rickie, thank you so much. And we really appreciate you joining us this evening. If you would not mind to unshare your screen, and I'd like to share my screen for a few minutes.
Let's see if I can figure out how to do it. There we go. I think I've figured it out. Yes.
I think you did. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. With any luck. Rickie, I just would like, on behalf of the club, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
We'd like to present you with this certificate of appreciation, a virtual certificate. And it's we hereby grant this certificate to you for imparting valuable insights and inspiration as our guest speaker this evening, December 3rd, 2019. So we thank you so much for joining us this evening. And Rich has graciously agreed to read our four-way test this evening. Rich?
It is my pleasure. Please pardon my cold, but I'll do my best. Okay, the four-way test of things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Rich. And with that, I would like to stop sharing my screen and we're going to stop recording.